I'm a broadcaster with WOSU Radio Classical 101. It's my pleasure to be here to introduce someone most of you already met, but to talk with Raven Chacon, who is, as you know, here in residence. And one of the first thing I like to ask a musician when I meet them for the first time is, how old were you when somebody put an instrument in your hands?
Yeah, there's a real instrument or
How old were you when somebody thought this boy should play this boy should make music?
Probably not till grad school is the answer to that. But no, I wanted a guitar when I was a kid, and my dad built me one out of a drawer out of a old dresser, and we put some strings on it, and probably a broomstick or something for the fretboard. But I tried to play it. And then later, that was probably about, 6 years old or something. And later on, the family was living on the Navajo reservation. Later on, the family moved to Albuquerque, and my parents met this woman who offered to give me and my sister free piano lessons. And so my mom said, you have to do this now. She's offering it, it's free. You better do it. And so we both did that for about 3 years. And I stuck with it. And I really liked doing it. I really liked playing. My goal was still to learn the guitar, but what happened was I learned to read music through those lessons. And my sister didn't stick with music, but she became an artist as well. So I think it was very formative for us to do that.
So when you were a little kid, or you were beginning piano lessons, were you, being pointed toward the Clementi two-hand exercises and things like that, or were you steered away from, I guess we'd call the Western canon as a young kid, or did you take yourself away from it? Have you taken yourself away from it?
Yeah, no,
the
certainly.
Bach, Beethoven.
We're kids, and so a lot of finger exercises. Eventually, there were some kind of pieces, nothing classical yet, but just some pieces that kids might play in a kind of child recital repertoire. And so I learned that, but I learned how to read. I think that was important. I never got to a level of playing anything, by a classical composer. Really, not at that age. But I'll tell you a story of what kind of happened here was, we'd been studying with this woman for a couple of years, and we'd never seen her give a concert. I mean, she was an amazing pianist, not just saying that because I was a little kid and anybody's going to be amazing when you're that age, but she really was, yeah. She'd play, we'd show up, and she'd already be practicing whatever it is she's practicing. She was a student at the University of New Mexico. And one day she told my mother, she said, bring the kids, I'm giving a concert on Friday night. So my mother, made us get dressed up, and we went down to the concert hall at the university. And, we got really dressed up. My parents got dressed up. And we're sitting there, and my teacher comes out. There's a piano on stage. She's coming out wearing a bathrobe, and she's carrying a bunch of rubber duckies. And I'm kind of mad because I'm thinking, well, I had to get dressed up, and she didn't even get dressed up. She's wearing a bathrobe. And she walks around the piano and throws the rubber duckies into the piano and hits a couple notes, turns on a kitchen timer, slams the lid shut to the piano. And I'm like, wow, what is this? Some people are laughing, other people are telling the people who are laughing, shh. And I'm just like, wow, what's going on? Is this comedy hour or something? What's happening here? Anyway, she plays some more, closes the lid to the keyboard shut, slams it, and walks off stage, and everybody applauds. And afterwards, she introduces us to this older gentleman, and she says, these are some of my students. She invited some of the other kids that she taught. And I shook this man's hand, and this was John Cage. In 1989, he came as the composer in residence for the annual Composer Symposium. And I'm not going to say that I was influenced by that, the rubber ducky performance. I don't know which piece to this day that was, but But what happened was, as a teenager, later, doing experiments with cassette tape, going to the library, listening to college radio, getting really into experimental music, this name kept coming up, John Cage. And I'm thinking, I met this guy, you know? That's the only living composer I've ever met in my life, is John Cage. It didn't seem like a stretch to become a composer, because I met this guy. He was here in Albuquerque. I didn't know where he lived. I thought he was a local Albuquerque guy, you know? But to me, that was one degree of separation away from being a composer. And so I think I took his work more serious because of that.
How old were you when you were exposed to John Cage for the first time?
Other than meeting him when I was
with
like
the Duckies, I mean, you know, with
12 years old or
12
something,
years old.
11 maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, he did something right because he lived to be 106, John Cage. So over a long, long career, he was a total original. And when I read about you and listened to a lot of your music, I thought, I haven't really heard anything like this, and it made me keep listening. And I kept going back on YouTube, and I kept checking it out again, and I kept wanting to get from as much of the performances as I could. So one of the things that, when researching you, it is said that you specialized or maybe invented something called noise music. What is noise music?
Yeah, I certainly didn't invent that. You know, it's just making noise, you know. Very loud, I think. You know, there's a genre of this kind of thing. There's people all over the world who engage in this genre of noise music. It's a genre like, you know, hip-hop is a genre, or techno, or classical music. And that was another thing I think I came upon accidentally. I was a guitarist. As a kid, I was interested in rock music, heavy metal specifically, and the sonorities of distortion. And I ended up having, you know, I had an electric guitar, and you know, you get a distortion pedal, an effect pedal, and you know, plug that in and make a noise, make a racket with that, play aggressive music with that, and I felt I wanted more distortion pedals, so I borrowed my friend's distortion pedal and plugged 2 of them in, and I tried to get as many as I could one day. I think I got up to 4. And plugged them all in, and I loved the sound. I couldn't even hear the note anymore. I just heard noise. And so I became frustrated with I think rock music and heavy metal music. I mean, I'm still a fan of all kinds of music, but what I did is then thought about this drawer from the dresser and the broomstick and the wire attached to it. I made it my own bass guitar, much like my father did when we were kids, and stuck a microphone in that and tried to play that. I wanted to make an instrument there was no history. I couldn't be a virtuoso or the worst player on that instrument because nobody had played that instrument before. So I'm both the best player and the worst player on this instrument. And to me, that was very liberating. That's where I learned to improvise, was playing an instrument with no history attached to it. And I think, you know, by doing these kinds of things, also experimenting with cassette tapes, recording on cassette tapes. I don't know if people still use cassette tapes here, anybody in this room. It's an old technology. I won't even talk about answering machines, but I used to take the cassette tapes from answering machines because they have a loop inside of them. And we'd record on them and push the pause button like it was an instrument and unscrew the cassette tape and put the tape in backwards and just make sound with these things. So I was doing all these experimentations, and that led me to making noise, you know, this kind of noise music that I still make today. But I wasn't really aware that other people were doing this. You know, I think when the internet started coming out, I was aware that a lot of people in Japan were doing this kind of music making. And so, but certainly nobody in Albuquerque that I was aware of was doing this. I got out of Albuquerque, there was nothing to do there. I didn't meet anybody who was interested in the things I was doing. So I moved to California, I went to Cal Arts, and was happy to find a ton of people doing this kind of weird music that I was also interested in. And so, yeah, that's the part of my practice. That's the third. I think I can almost say that my practice is equally divided into three things that I do. And being a performer and improviser on these electronic instruments, I still use cassette tape, I still use distortion pedals, I use my voice a lot, is a big part of what I do.
One of the people you studied with was considered a father of electronic music, Morton Subotnick. And he was doing it in the 40s. I mean, he was, going back there, I think he picked up where George Antheil left off, and he was working in the 20s. So talk a bit about Subotnick's influence, and when you went to find teachers, it doesn't have to be Subotnick, but when you already working and experimenting in these genres and making sounds and noise music, when you went to find teachers, did it change you or did it liberate you to keep doing what you were doing?
Maybe both. I had become aware of CalArts because of Morton Subotnick. He was living in New Mexico when I was studying at the University of New Mexico, and met him at that time and understood that he had also was teaching at CalArts. And so that's when that school first came on the radar. This isn't a plug for CalArts, by the way, but maybe you want to go to grad school there. I don't know. It's a crazy place, or at least was at one time. But then I researched the faculty and found the composer James Tenney, and it was his music that I was really interested in. And so I wrote him, I told him I wanted to study with him. I got accepted to the program, and I went out there to work with him specifically. I also studied with Mort, but yeah, I think it was Jim Tenney's music, both this kind of combination of these electroacoustic experiments, but also writing for chamber instruments, making very process-based pieces. James Tenney's worked with tape collage, text scores, all kinds of different, it's almost like everything he did was quite different than the next piece. And so also worked very microtonally, worked with a lot of different tuning systems. And so I got it, yeah, I was a fan of his music and learned a lot from him. But all this to say, I think what was equally inspirational was just my classmates at that school. I think you're in this environment where everybody's trying to outdo each other, outshock each other even. And yeah, I feel like I fit in on that kind of thing. It's 1,000 artists trapped in one building, and everybody just can do whatever they want. Performance art, dance, filmmaking, sculpture, and composing. And you can jump ships even if you want.
Well, speaking of that, it's my understanding that you have either another career or a complementary career in the visual arts, and that you work visually and sonically separately, and I guess together. I mean, do you maintain a separate art studio for the visual arts that does not inform your music, or is it impossible not to inform one informing the other?
Everything I work on is sound and music, all of it, but it can take on other forms. I think part of what happened also is I didn't think music composition was a good career move when I first went to university as an undergrad. So I studied film and video. I went into that program, but it was too expensive at that time. In the 90s, we didn't have cameras in our pockets like we do now. Everything was these big cameras, you used tape, you had to edit it in another location. It's very expensive. So yeah, I ended up studying composition because that was my other interest. Probably still it was my main interest. I just thought I'd go in the other direction. And so that part was always there, drawing, having an interest in moving image. Performance has always been there, not just music, but any kind of performance, I think is a big part of what I do as well. Even writing scores for performance. So this idea, I think, as a music major to maybe the wrong thing to be told, but that things need a score, set off this trajectory that maybe everything I was making needed some kind of document, whether that was a text score, or maybe it was a graphic notation, or maybe it was a Western music score. And so this visual art practice came about by accident because I was making scores for a lot of compositions, and they were visually appealing to people who, maybe didn't. Maybe there were curators and others who saw the potential of those as being exhibitable on their own. I was also doing these experiments, making compositions, and some of these compositions were not ever going to be possible on a stage. I wrote a piece for guns. I had this idea for making a piece for boats. I mean, even the guns, it's not an interesting recording. So something doesn't fit on the stage, doesn't fit on a recording. What do you do with it? And so this brought me back to presenting it in other ways, putting it in a room with a video or just very loud speakers. And what that led me to was this collaborating with some folks who were a collective that had just formed. This is around 2008. Other indigenous artists from the Southwest called Postcommodity. And these artists were also interested in noise. They were also working in different mediums. Each member had a different skill set. There was a member who worked with video, another who worked with poetry and text, another who worked with sculpture and painting, and eventually another member who worked a lot with technology and kind of generative systems and other kinds of new media kinds of tools. And so we came together, and I joined that group with having this sound skill set, and we just started making work together. Very experimental, very conceptual, very political work. And that was kind of my postgraduate education. Was
political in what way? Could you expand on that a bit?
With that group, I think, all of us coming from different tribes, we were looking at, the way that the United States tried to kill us, for one. That was an important one. And talk about that through art. And not just history, talking about that's ongoing. That's an ongoing system of oppression that is happening. So we would talk about these things. We would talk about the U.S.-Mexico border, which has the same kind of policy. Same racist policy, same policy of terrorism towards its own citizens. So we would make work about this stuff, and found that art can be this, this vehicle for expressing who we are, but not just telling our stories, talking about global concerns of a lot of people, of all of us, really. I mean, some of this work was also about where we live, the stewardship of the lands we all live in, and the ecological concerns that I think we are all responsible for as humans.
So your music and your work reaches into many different levels of our lives. Brahms was famous for saying that music is music, and music is music is music, and that's what it is. What I'm hearing you say, that it permeates really the world we're living in now. You can't really ignore the world the way it is or the way you think it should be and be a creative artist. Is that fair?
That's right, yeah. I think there's an opportunity to talk about these concerns that you might have through art. And I was talking with students this week. Instrumental music can be a very difficult vehicle for doing that. I mean, if there's no words, how might somebody learn about what your work is about? We have to write program notes, right? You could put them in there. It needs a title. You might have a title that explains this, but yeah, I came upon that dilemma. I said, I'm a composer. I want to write a string quartet, but how can I express some of these concerns or even worldviews through these compositions? And for me, it became a process of understanding that music making is a very collaborative thing. Music itself is community, and communities have power, and communities can be places of discussion. And so, I think that's something that has been important to me in continuing in this medium, is thinking through the social dynamics of the process of making music, of composing for others, of thinking through the traditions of music making, the hierarchies and priorities of Western music. A composer being up in some tower making a score and giving it to people that they don't meet and ask them to play. I don't like that model. I like more collaborative models. I like more co-determined decision-making as well. I think that itself can be a political act in the rehearsal of music, in the options given to collaborators. And so, yeah, these are all systems that end up becoming realized through some of these scores.
I always thought it was a bit of a danger or a problem for a creative artist or a musician who stays in the practice room by themselves all day. What I'm hearing you say is collaboration is crucial, that you must be in a group, or people have to listen to you and respond to you, and you listen to them, and et cetera. Like in a laboratory, I would think a university like this is perfect for that. I mean, you're lucky to be here because you can talk to each other and listen to each other and share worldviews and disagree and really learn how to do that.
Yeah, and it's not limited to just the compositional process. I mean, you could. Any one of you could start a record label and support each other. You could open a space here in town and open a venue and host music. These can become important community spaces or resources that you're providing, and I think that's also important for this kind of collaboration or this mode of thinking laterally, horizontally, and spreading knowledge and discussion and concerns amongst the people who are also making music with you.
I'm pretty sure I'm the oldest person in the room here tonight, so I can just make the observation that what I'm seeing among students and younger musicians and younger artists, they're wonderfully entrepreneurial today in a way that my generation was not. I mean, they are starting record labels. They are taking responsibility for their own careers and taking responsibility for their own work to be seen and heard, rather than waiting, because you can wait a really damn long time, as I'm sure you know, to get noticed. So it's great to get out there and just, make it happen. I do want to talk about the Voiceless Mass, which is being performed, I believe, tomorrow night, for which you won the Pulitzer Prize for Music in 2022. You are also a MacArthur Fellow, which is probably the most prestigious award in the arts, those two, from the following year. So I heard the term Voiceless Mass, and I'm immediately thinking of Mozart's Requiem, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, it's voiceless. Okay, how's this going to work? So I watched it and watched again and again and again, and if you haven't heard, half of you are playing in it probably, Nora, am I right? Yeah, you're lucky. But you had interesting things to say about the silences in that piece and about the role of the church in that piece and what you were trying to do. Could you explain that a little bit for us?
Yeah, the invitation was given to write a piece of music, and the premiere of the work was going to be in the Catholic Church in the city of Milwaukee. And the other thing was, this was around Thanksgiving holiday. This was an annual Thanksgiving Day concert. And so I felt, the urge to do something to respond to this situation that I'd been put in of wanting to write this commission for these amazing players and an opportunity to use the church organ. And it came from a few different places, I think. I grew up semi-Catholic. I grew up in the church a bit, and was thinking through some of the things that had come out in recent news. I think over, certainly during pandemic, I think maybe this had reached its peak of abuse that was happening in the Catholic Church of young people. There was also further news and stories that had come out about this abuse happening throughout the 20th century and the church's collaboration with residential schools, especially in Canada, to Indigenous communities in Canada. And it got me thinking about just the role of, even why I was brought up Catholic, is because the Spanish had colonized the Southwest and had done so underneath, the carrying the cross, and there was an ultimatum given to the people that they either converted to Catholicism or they were killed. And so this, of course, this conversion led to a loss of languages, a lot of languages. They were discouraged from speaking the words that they knew. And so I wanted to make a piece about this. Also, I was thinking about the organ itself, and the organ usually takes up one wall of the church. It literally is part of the building, part of the institution. It's holding up the building. It's holding up the roof. And even keyboard instruments, we think of what keyboard instruments were invented to do. They're invented to replace 10 musicians. And so I wrote the piece for church organ, conductor, and 10 other instruments. These 10 other instruments were going to be displaced, spread out around the room, and separated, like these children were separated when they had to go to these schools. And each of these instruments is trying to let their voices be heard individually in the room, in the church. And they are doing so despite the power and enormity of both the organ and also electronic sign tones, which are reinforcing the massive structure that the audience is sitting in. Usually what happens when this piece is performed is that the person on stage, the sole person on stage, is the conductor. There's a critique in that to think through these priorities and hierarchies within Western music. That the conductor is the leader, maybe the conductor is the priest, making that association as well. So you listen to this piece, and it is basically written in the style of something like Mozart's Requiem or Bach's, B minor Mass, but without voice. And as you're listening to this, there's 3 moments in the piece where the conductor stops conducting in the normal way and does something called a cage clock. Do you know the cage clock? Back to John Cage. The cage clock is taking the hands, the conductor takes their hands and raises them up to the ceiling, and then slowly becomes a clock. And so then the notes might say, play at 15 seconds, play at 20 seconds, play at 30 seconds, 45 seconds, a minute. And so for me, that's a way to slow down time, show this transition between perhaps the centuries, saying that this colonization is not just a 20th century thing. This has been going on for 300-400 years. And so time elapses in those moments. It also gives the opportunity to have the conductor do this.
Now, is that meant to be prayer?
Yes. Yeah. Every voice or every instrument makes a voice in Voiceless Mass. See, I never talk about these things. These things are in a score, and nobody would ever hear them unless I spoke about it. So this is insight only for you all here tonight. The percussionist at one point gets to whisper something under their breath that nobody else will hear in the hall. They get to say whatever they want, but nobody else should hear it. The clarinetist has this whole note that's tied to another whole note. They have to hold this very long note. And they're asked to change the shape of their mouth into these different shapes. And this is the lost syllables and vocables of their indigenous language. And so that drone is going to be shaped by the changing shape of their mouth. There's a quarter note that's played with the dynamic of like 5 or 6 P's underneath it. It's the quietest note in the piece. Nobody can hear it. It's been silenced. There's a super ball that rubs on a bass drum, and this is to mimic speech. And at the very end, there is a bowed cymbal on a timpani, while the timpani pedal goes up and down. And this is to sound like a cry happening at the very end. There's also a moment that the flautist can play anything they want that happened already in the piece. They get to recall a memory of something they had. And so all of this is inside the score. There's also a moment as well when the organ, if it has these, some of these organs have these shutter doors. And there's a moment when the score asks the organist to close those doors. And so all of this symbolism and metaphor is inside a lot of scores that I make. I don't explain them. I don't put them in the score, in the instructions. I only talk about them at things like this, you know. Or if somebody notices, what does that fermata mean? It shouldn't be there. Well, it's a sun coming up over the horizon, you know. So all these things, they mean something inside of the score. They're all conceptual objects in the story that I'm trying to share.
So basically, you are very tightly setting out what you want on paper. We're not talking about jazz improvisation here. It's clearly and precisely notated, as you said, with the position of the mouth meaning something else. Sometimes I noticed the musicians in the performance that I saw were spaced a certain way. Is that something that you do in every performance? Does it matter to you where they're positioned on stage? If the position is changed, does the piece change?
Yeah, that's a good question. I go back and forth on that one. Certainly every church is different. And so that is a part that always can change. You know, I still like to accommodate the preferences of the conductor and what they might need. Maybe they need, I mean, certainly they need to be able to see all the musicians that are performing. So this piece has been performed in some massive churches before, I think in the Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. You could be putting the contrabass all the way down the other end of the church, and it would be very difficult to see them. Also the organist, there's usually a mirror, you know, they have to see also the conductor. So that part is flexible. That part is always very site-specific to each performance because logistically we need to spread them out in a way that's both optimal for listening but also for the sight lines of the conductor.
One thing I was curious about, I was wondering if you would always insist that this instrument was 7.5 feet from this instrument, no matter where they were. I wasn't sure if it worked that precisely or not.
No, because you never know what you're going to get, right? I mean, you might have a huge hall, and yeah. And, you know, I'm starting to think, too, I mean, there's definitely specific requirements for the organ. I showed up one time, and the organ was tiny. I was like, you know, I think everybody's got to crowd in a little bit to hear this massive, ominous organ I try to put in this piece. It was very comical, a bit of a Stonehenge moment, if you guys know what I'm talking about there. But yeah, no, it's very site specific, and I think, you know, to me, I'm interested in that. I'm interested that this piece has traveled to a lot of different places. And I'm happy to say, too, that, you know, it's written in a way that was meant to be this kind of Trojan horse. It can only be played in churches. So if it's going to...
That's why you're a Gloria Day tomorrow night. Okay, I just figured that out, okay.
So if it is to be performed, it means it might be tied to a congregation that attends these churches. And a lot of churches need money, so they rent them out to new music organizations, you know, and so, you know, we become part of that audience as well. And so, no, but I'm happy to say that a lot of leaders of these churches, the stewards of these buildings, have been welcoming of this piece, have engaged in the conversation, have acknowledged the history, and some have apologized for their church's role in that, you know, that violent history. So I'm grateful that the piece has been able to do that and be, you know, in its own way a kind of reconciliation, at least through music. Never in my, you know, cynical dreams that I imagined that music could do that. And so for me, it winning the Pulitzer and having this life, or at least the attention, has that's been the important part of all that to me.
Do you hope it heals, or do you hope it raises awareness, or do you hope it pisses people off?
No, I don't want to piss anybody off. I think reconciliation, resolution, to use a musical term, is important. I think as abstract and complex as art may be, I think, ultimately, I think we want to make the world a better place. There was a young part of me that, was angry and wanted to destroy things. Sometimes I think I told a student today they should break glass as their percussion in their piece, but still, that's going to have meaning, right? But I think thinking back to when I was a teenager and my frustration with this heavy metal music it was talking about destruction, perhaps in a cathartic way, but I wanted to think of other topics. I wanted to think about healing. I wanted to think about relationships with people. I wanted to think about, animals, birds, and not see those things be destroyed.
I want to leave time for questions and comments. Also, I'm certainly interested in anything that you're all working on, or your specific interests, or where you see yourself going in music as you ask questions. And maybe you can hand the mic around, or just be loud.
All right, who's first?
So when balancing an instrument as loud as an organ with, you said, 10 other musicians, how do you find that balance between the depth and loudness of something so huge versus someone that's just their lungs?
Yeah, I think, with this piece in particular, I'm finding it's important for me to be there when I can, so I can kind of tune the volume of that to adjust it. There's written dynamics, but as we know, those are all adjustable and gain staged, Of course, a forte means something different in every room, And so if we need to bring the piece up, we need somebody to play louder, we do that. Or maybe the proximity of those players to the audience is going to help, resolve that and balance that. I haven't come upon a situation yet where the organ was absolutely too loud and it overshadowed the instrumentalists. I don't think that's happened yet. But yeah, I'd try to figure out, maybe usually there's somebody who knows the organ well as we're planning this thing, and they would say, hey, this thing is really loud. We might want to mic the other instruments, for instance, and run them through amplification. So that would be the solution, probably. But yeah, if that wasn't possible and it was like a last-minute thing, we'd probably corral the audience into a tighter formation and have the instrumentalists be much closer to them.
So outside of what you'd already mentioned, like John Cage and some of the more experimental stuff, I was a bit more interested in what your musical influences were. I know you'd mentioned rock and metal especially. I was curious if you had any other insights, or if those genres had any other insights in your musical development.
Other genres? Yeah, a lot of things. Obviously, Navajo music was in there, and I truly believe anything you ever listen to, for better or worse, will be a part of the music you make. But yeah, I listen to a lot of things. I'll tell you, I had a job driving for a while when I was about 19 years old, and the vehicle I was driving had these kind of preset buttons you could push to change radio stations, and it must be a terrible attention span or something, because I would just sit there and drive and like keep pushing these presets in and out. Same with the pause button of the cassette thing I was talking about. And I think that influenced some of my music. Even though a lot of my music is very slow moving or might contain a lot of silences, I also make very kind of rapid changing music, or I used to. I don't know, but I think at a certain point I used to play with anybody who would have me. So I played in a mariachi band. I played in just any other kind of band that would have me. You know, I played piano in some bands. I played bass guitar in other bands. I think I even sang in some other thing. I took, you know, I was in a choir for a little bit. I just loved making music in any way I could, and certainly that was I think a big influence, at least for the practice of playing, you know, and maybe improvising. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I listen to a lot of contemporary classical music, Alvin Lucier, like I said, James Tenney, a composer, Marianne Amiche. I'm very interested in the work that she does. And then, yeah, the older I got, I think just friends and colleagues and some of the music they were making, for sure. But my favorite thing to do, I don't listen to a lot of recorded music. I try when I can, though, to watch live music and go to concerts. To me, that is a time to take a break from whatever I'm working on. If I listen to recorded music while I'm working on a string quartet, whatever I'm listening to is going to end up in the string quartet. So I try not to I get distracted too easily if I do that.
Aside from commissions, I'm a performance person primarily who kind of writes for fun. So aside from commissions, how do you know when you have a piece, when you have something you want written down to be in a score and to be performed by others?
You know, if I have an idea independent of any invitation, I certainly, you know, walk around with a notebook and jot down that idea and maybe even sketch something out and then save it for later until there is a real invitation. And then maybe I pull the notebook back out and look through all the other pages and see if something fits the invitation. Sometimes it's very specific, though, and it just immediately calls to me, like the invitation to do the church organ in the church on Thanksgiving. Immediately, I knew what I wanted to do with that one. And there's been other installations. I think I was showing some students one of the works I made in the United Arab Emirates. Finding a site and learning about the history of that site might conjure, you know, an idea for making an artwork. So yeah, I mean, there's ideas come. Sometimes ideas are hard to come by, but to conjure or induce inspiration, I think, yeah, going to see live music, going to exhibitions brings a lot of motivation to me often, yeah.
When Voiceless Mass was premiered in Milwaukee, that has more of indigenous populations in San Francisco and even here. Were there any Native audience members that resonated much with it? I know when I listened to it, it kind of spoke to my bones a bit, and I think that's something that when you not even have that trauma firsthand, but the generational trauma, or I had a family member that went through, many of us do, through the boarding schools. Did they come up to you? If they did, and what were their discussions like?
I didn't have an opportunity through the, I didn't talk before the performance that time. The program notes said what the piece was about. I don't know if everybody read those program notes. The opening of the concert was a drum group from the area, I think Ho Chunk, that had performed as well. There was also the brilliant artist and filmmaker Sky Hopinka was in town also, and he was at the concert, so he was at the premiere. But I think once it won the Pulitzer, I was able to tell the broader story in my own words and expand upon it. And that brought a lot of feedback and attention and responses from different Native peoples about that, and other peoples too who've grew up through the church and folks from the Black community, folks from other places, talking about their experiences also. Yeah.
Is there a connection between Voiceless Mass and Silent Choir?
Yeah, so I have this piece called Silent Choir. It's a sound installation. It's basically a room, I guess, or it's a quiet space. You don't see anything. It's usually a dim space. And what you're hearing is a recording of a silent protest of about 20 women, indigenous women, who were at the Standing Rock Water Protector Gathering in 2016. And behind these women are about another 200 people, all of them in a kind of standoff with police. But they are not saying anything. They are not yelling at the police. They are not expressing the frustration that they could be expressing. Instead, they are simply staring at these police and construction crews who are collaborating to destroy the water of the Standing Rock Reservation. And in this recording, I feel that you can feel the presence of these 200 or 300 people. And I feel you can also hear the shame of the police in this recording. And so this was something I had captured, I'll use that word, by accident. I was there attending to support water protectors. I was there for about 2 weeks, also during Thanksgiving, and this was 2016. And just had this recording device in my pocket. I often used to bring a recording device with me as another kind of set of ears, and also the opportunity that I might hear something or capture something really interesting. And in that moment, that was what I gathered. So it became this audio work called Silent Choir. I was working on Voiceless Mass around the same time I had an invitation to present this work at the Whitney Biennial, and it didn't have a title yet. And so it's a bit of a inversion on the same kind of meaning. There's Silent Choir and there's Voiceless Mass. And they're two separate unrelated works, or maybe they are related as it relates to the oppression of indigenous people, but they're very separate, but they have a similar title. Sometimes people call this chamber work Silent Mass, and other people have called the other piece Voiceless Choir.
Hey, so you probably remember me from yesterday.
Yep.
I was the violinist playing for Voiceless Mass. There's a sine wave in this piece, so I'm just wondering, what is the sine wave supposed to depict? It's supposed to depict like a gunshot that goes through, and it has like this ear ringiness?
It's not so. We will hopefully dial that in tomorrow, but that is another thing that usually needs to be tuned within the space, the levels of amplification for that sine tone. It also, what you only heard half the sine tones because there needs to be a subwoofer also emitting the low frequencies that are often, coming through it from the soundboard. But the purpose of the sine tone is to reinforce the architecture, the structure that we are inside. So it's reinforcing the low frequencies of the organ. The organ might be resonating one half, rumbling one half of the space, and this sine tone is matching it on another side. And so if, the sine tone too can be very directional or can fill the space that like no other instrument can. So I put it in there so that people acknowledge all corners of the room that they're in, see the facade of the grandness that is the church, and its own, maybe its own facade that is an illusion of something that is a higher power. I think churches rely on this this optic of something being bigger than the people that are inside of it. It's almost making everybody smaller, and so the sine tone seeks to do that with sound. But also it should be quite inaudible. It should be very subtle. The highest frequencies and the lowest frequencies, create this kind of rumble or this floating tone. There's another part to this too. The reason is temporally, I think of the sine tone as something that is of today or of the future even. It's certainly electronic. So it's another nod to this history that the organ is very old, maybe even invented around, I don't know when the organ was invented, but does anybody? But maybe it is somewhere around the time of early American colonization, at least the developed organ as it gets used in classical music. And the sine tone is today. So it's to say that we aren't talking about history only, we're talking about today as well. So it's a sonic device to bring us into the present.
One more?
You mentioned doing sketches and I think sculpture. How do you put physical art into music?
I put the music into the physical art so I do it the other way around. It's really just, sometimes that's the best medium for the idea that I have. And it's still a vehicle for sound making, or sound is still the main carrier of the message, but it takes on a different form. It's maybe it's something that needs to happen every day, all day. And so it's probably not the best idea to have people make that sound. I should have a sculpture make it, or speakers should play it back from a media player or something, or a computer. So that's really the decision. I mean, I think it's actually quite practical sometimes, but it's also that with the form, it can tell more of the idea that I'm trying to put across, or the story, or whatever it is I'm working with. So it's just finding the best. It's like finding the best instrument for a piece of music. It's finding the best situation to share it with others.
May I ask one question?
Yeah.
Raven, you mentioned architecture of music, and of course, I don't know if everybody knows, but you teach at Columbia University School of Architecture. You teach graduate students. So my question is, what do they learn from you, and what do you learn from them? Because you said it's like very seminar interactive.
Yeah. I learn about architecture from them. I mean, I'm a composer, right? But for me, I'm prompting the students to consider sound as part of the environment that they're wanting to make. And so, I think these students are thinking of the world that we all live in, and do we want to live in very plain spaces? Do we want to live our lives in white cubes? And what will that white cube do to you if you have to live in that space every day, or work in that space, or go to school in that space? And so making these spaces not just bearable to be in, but also maybe they induce or motivate or encourage other ways of living, of being. It can stimulate you. It can heighten your emotions, or it can calm you, perhaps. And this is not done silently. I think sound can be something that might need to be masked. If we keep hearing giant trucks, suppose this room was near a freeway, we might want to mask that sound. Perhaps the place is too quiet, and we want to allow for some kind of ambient sound to be in the space. Maybe the sound is not forgiving in having a conversation. Christopher and I are trying to have a conversation, and we just can't hear each other because of the terrible acoustics of a certain room. Then you want to design that to turn it into a space where conversation is encouraged. And so those are some of the topics we think through, and we think about just the places, just the world we want to live in, and architecture is a big part of that, and also other kinds of infrastructures, bridges, tunnels, streets, places, parks. All of these things are part of that environment as well.
You good?
We're good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Christopher.